Hello, and welcome to the Faith Science Podcast. My name is Tyler Bublitz, and welcome back to the first Sunday in Lent for the week of March 9th, 2025. I'm excited to have you here. I'm excited to get in this week's podcast, and I am excited that we are in this Lenten season. I know it's a weird thing to be excited about, but I do enjoy Lent. And the reason that I enjoy Lent is it typically is a time where we get to actually slow down. It's typically a time where you get to reflect. And I think having worked in the church before, I know that sometimes feels the opposite. We typically feel like things are getting busier. You're planning for Easter. You have more services. There's things that are busy, but I think it's also really important for us to remember this is a time that we're supposed to be doing more reflection. This is supposed to be a time where we're slowing down. This is supposed to be a time where we are thinking about what this all means and contemplating it deep within our own hearts. And I think that's where we can easily jump to the next season. We can jump ahead. We can be filling our time with things that make it busy. But I think this is truly supposed to be one of these times where we slow down. This is truly supposed to be one of those times of reflection. And I think until we really acknowledge that and spend time with it, I think we really do miss out on a lot of what Lent then truly means. And I know there's a lot of different Lenten goals and things that people will make, either that they're giving up something or doing something in particular for Lent. And I think that's important. I think it is important then to make that a more of a ritual type thing to reflect on, to think about, to move forward in. And I think that's where then we are able to start to grasp at a small sense what Christ was doing for us. But let's look back to last week's question, which was, where have you seen God make lightning fast changes in your life? And I think lightning fast is a really relative term, because I think about like right now, in the scheme of my life, there are things that right now feel agonizingly long for me to be doing. There are things that I am trying to do behind the scenes to help with some different ideas to bring to the podcast, but they're seeming to take agonizingly long. But I know in the scheme of things, it is really truly lightning fast. It is quite fast on what I am trying to do and what I'm trying to bring forward, but it doesn't seem like it in the moment. I know for me, there's been different habits and things that I've changed and been working on throughout the new year. And again, some of those were basically, I decided to do it one day, and being able to see how my body responds, seeing how God has gifted our bodies to be able to do amazing things. I think sometimes we overlook some of these things where things happen very, very quickly. I know where I'm at right now with the weather has changed drastically very, very quickly. It's somewhat concerning to me as an environmentalist, but also it's been very, very quick. And I think that's where we have to remember that we have a God who plays the long game, but we also have a God who does at times say, now is the time, and boom, something happens. And I think that's where it's different for us. We have to remember that we have a God who does work on both scales, and that changes our perception and allows us to actually grow when we allow ourselves to recognize that God is actually doing that. So let's just jump into it this week. The Old Testament text is out of Deuteronomy chapter 26, the first 11 verses of it. And this is one of those times here in the Old Testament where we are getting the promises of what is coming. This recognition on how the Lord has this land that's set aside for God's people. And we then have to recognize that at some point, that's where our ancestors will come, we will be there, and we will be provided for. That God has set it aside, but also God has provided for it. And I think about this kind of more metaphorically in a little ways, that God has prepared things for us as long as we are willing to walk into it. And I think that's where at times we try to strong arm our way in, and we don't recognize that there's times where God's saying, no. I'm just wanting you here, and then to work together with what's here, recognizing that I have provided for you. This land is flowing with milk and honey, coming from verse 9, that there are fruits of the land right here for you. You don't need to force it. I'm trying to gift it. Recognize the gift that is coming right in front of you, and recognizing that you will be together then with Levites and aliens, coming from verse 11, that the bounty of God is all being shared together, that this is something that all of us are being treated to, but also remembering back that this has come having gone through hard times in Egypt, going through affliction, going through things that were extremely difficult, and continuing to lay into and trust God through it all. The psalm that goes with that is Psalm 91, verses 1 and 2, and 9 through 16. This continues to play off of that idea on how the Lord is our shelter and God continues to be a fortress in which we trust in. But it's also this place then that we recognize that God has continued to prepare for us, and that God is protecting us, that God is laying down a place so that we shall not dash our foot against the stone, coming from verse 12, which will be important with the gospel text. But it's a God who has prepared this and loves us and deeply cares about us and wants to work with us and wants to provide for us, like a parent to a child. This idea of how much God does care about us and wants to be there with us and be able to provide for us. We just then have to acknowledge it along the way as well. The epistle text or second reading this week is out of Romans chapter 10, starting with verse 8b to 13. And this is then picking up off of that this is the recognition, this relationship that we have with God is based on the idea that we then have this relationship with God, that we love God and we're willing to confess it. But then in doing that, it's the recognition that there is no distinction then between who is saying that. It's not that we are then stating that I am better than you because I am of this clan or this particular group of people. No, that's all broken down. We are all then part of one family, the followers of Christ family. And in doing that, all these distinctions that we as humans put up are suddenly gone. There is no hierarchy. We are all on the same level playing field, recognizing that Christ is Lord. The gospel text this week is out of Luke chapter 4 with the first 13 verses of it. And this is a very familiar text, specifically when we're going into Lent. And this is where then Jesus gets driven into the wilderness and gets tested by the devil for 40 days. And there's 3 different tests we get in Luke's gospel here on how the Son of Man is commanded to take this stone and make it a loaf of bread. Jesus responds in verse 4 with, "One does not live by bread alone." The devil leads him up and sees all the kingdoms of the world. And the devil then says to him, "To you I will give all this authority and their glory, for it has been given over to me, and I give it to anyone I please. If you then will worship me, this will be yours." So essentially stating, here are all the kingdoms of the world. I have authority over them. And if you recognize that I am worthy of worship, I will give it all to you. And Jesus just states in verse 8, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. And this kind of defeats that one. The devil then brings him down to Jerusalem, to the pinnacle of the temple, and states, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down here. And this is where we get going back to the Psalm. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to protect you. And on their hands they will bear you up so that you do not dash your foot against a stone. And Jesus then responds in verse 12, do not put the Lord your God to the test. The devil then had finished every test and departed from him until an opportune time. So this is one of those times that then Satan realizes at this moment, I cannot win. I will then fold at this moment and then try again at another time. But before we jump into how faith and science come together this week, we have to do our shameless plugs. Both Working Preacher. If you haven't checked out Working Preacher, I'd highly recommend it. Between their sermon brainwaves podcasts, their commentaries, their discussions. Since I'm not an ordained minister, I use them on a weekly basis to help give me some ideas, direction, ways to be thinking about things, and ways to be contemplating things. So if you haven't checked that resource out, I'd highly recommend it. I'd also highly recommend checking out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt's Divinity Library. I really enjoy how they lay out the text week to week, but along with the art, prayers, hymns, colors, and daily devotions. If we're going to be digging into these texts every week and preparing for worship week after week, I'd highly recommend just checking out some of the daily devotions, going through some of this stuff on your own. Heck, you're already taking a half an hour to look at and think about these texts. It's worth taking that next step. So I'd highly recommend checking out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt's Divinity Library to be another resource to help you along that journey. Finally, I'd also highly recommend checking out the Green Blades Preaching Roundtable and the Green Blades Rising publication. This is either a weekly reflection or a monthly newsletter that goes through ecological echoes, implications, and urgencies to be able to be brought into weekly preaching, very similar to what I'm doing here, along with a lot of other great ecological resources. If you haven't checked that stuff out, I'd highly recommend it. There's some great resources over there, and I can't recommend checking that stuff out any higher. So we've entered Lent. And as I stated, I think this is typically a time that people either do something for Lent, and that's typically what I like, doing something. Christ did something for me, so I'm going to do something different to recognize this. But it's really easy for us to make it like a badge of honor as we are doing it, or that we're giving up something. I am staying away from something. I am not doing something. I am going to sacrifice in some way similar so I get a taste of what Christ has done. And again, it becomes like this badge of courage that we're doing. And I've done multiple different things. I know within my own life, I've done reading through Psalms in 6 weeks of Lent. I've gone through and I did push-ups one year every day during Lent. It's an idea. It's something to help us to try to understand. And one that is very common is that people give up some type of chocolate or sugar or something of that nature. And we know, as especially me being an American, being in a developed nation, this is something that our country and a lot of the world is struggling more and more with our consumption of food just in general. And thus we're having like an obesity crisis across the world as we're consuming more and more. And one of the things that potentially is driving some of this is sugar in and of itself. And it's how we are utilizing sugar. It's not necessarily purely victimizing sugar. It's how we are consuming it. And there's a couple things that are kind of going on that I think it's worth thinking about and being able to contemplate this and consider this as we are getting into the season of deep reflection. I think it's worth thinking about. So sugar is a carbohydrate. Sugar is something that then it's quick energy, in this case, usually quick energy to our bodies, helping us go through the ATP, being able to work our bodies. We need energy to be able to do things. The sugar helps with that. And if you think about it, sugar in its purest form is truly just energy captured from the sun. Most, at least here in the United States, most of our sugar either comes from sugar cane or sugar beets. Sugar cane being a plant, and that it's ground up and processed to be able to come like what we are more familiar with the table sugar, or sugar beets, the root of a beet, ground up and again becoming something very, very similar, and thus being able to be utilized in these various different forms. But one of the things when we're running into issues is the aspect on how we are consuming our sugar. So if you think about if we were in a grocery store area and we were having to forage somewhat for our own food, sugar would be a very hard resource to come by. Our bodies would, when you find something like that, would want to consume quite a bit of it. But when you think about when you're eating something that is naturally sweet, which can even be something like a carrot, but all the way to like a peach or an apple or raspberries, strawberries, blueberries, when you're consuming this, there's a lot of other things that are coming along with that. So we're thinking about that there's a lot of vitamins and nutrients, but also a lot of fiber as you're consuming this. And this has been one of the things that is being theorized within science, is that typically as we were consuming this, our bodies naturally kind of started to figure out, okay, this is about enough to be able to get that fast acting sugar. But along with having that, there is the fiber, there is these other things, the body had things to actually extract. So thus, we didn't get necessarily the pure spikes that we're used to with how we consume sugar now. It was more of a decay over time, slow and steady, because there was a lot of things that our body was needing to extract from it. With how readily available sugar is now, this is where some of the things become a little bit harder. Our body then, because there isn't anything to extract, it's just quick, it's a quick hit, and our body goes up and down very, very quickly, making for our insulin to go up and down just as fast, and thus not this slow, steady decay over time. And thus, with it not being attached necessarily to something that has fiber and nutrients and other things to it, it can make it so that also that there isn't as much the body is trying to flush through it fairly quickly and move through it fairly quickly, because there isn't anything for the body to be able to get out of it. And that's where one of the things that we've also looked at is when we've then also created artificial sweeteners, your various different, go through the coffee flavoring aisle and the various different types of sugars that you can put in. There's a lot of them that our body doesn't know what to do with. Thus, it's a 0-calorie sweetener, but it's basically our body doesn't know what to do with it. There's nothing to absorb, so it just flushes right through. So thus it gets the sugar rush, the spike, but there isn't anything to be able to extract from it. And thus, this is where we run into these issues. And when you think about when we have things that have more fiber, when we haven't necessarily extracted everything out, take like the difference of eating blueberries versus blueberry juice. Blueberry juice is just basically water, sugar, maybe you get a little bit of some of the nutrients out of it, but there is no more of the fiber. There is nothing that's slowing it down. There isn't as nutrient dense for our bodies to be able to absorb. And thus, our body then moves through it fairly quickly, and it makes it very easy for us to be hungry again, because there isn't something for the body to be working on and to do. There isn't any extraction that is needed. And so thus we are consuming more, thus with it being added as these different sweeteners into our food more and more, makes it thus that we're eating more and more, and thus it can cause a lot of different issues down the road for us. One of the examples I'll attach down below from SciShow is if you think about an orange. If you eat an orange, the amount of sugar that's in an orange isn't crazy, but there's still a lot of things, and you're probably going to sit and eat one orange. Whereas if you're going to have a glass of orange juice, that's the equivalent of 4 oranges. So you have 4 times the amount of sugar coming from it, and you're not going to think twice about it because it doesn't have the fiber. There's nothing that is filling you up. It is just basically a quick sugary drink with some additional benefits. But yes, it's a quick sugary drink that is going through our body, and our body, it's not needing that. It's looking for the things to be able to extract and be able to sustain, not these quick hits. And so it's used to, oh, cool, there's sugar, but there's also some nutrients there, especially from our more ancestral DNA lines of things. So why do I bring this up when I'm thinking about the temptation of Jesus? It's not just because it's Lent and it's something that we look at doing. But if you look at what Satan is going after quick hits. Satan is going after quick hits. Satan is going after, here, turn this in the bread so that you can eat it right now. And Christ is saying, no, I'm not in the game of doing something just for me. I'm in the game for benefiting a lot of people. Okay, cool. Then if you acknowledge that all this kingdom, which we know is not his, but Satan is saying is his, and if you just worship me, this is all yours. You can make this big impact on all these people. And Jesus, no. This is not yours. We are told to worship God, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to take some bargain offer because you see that. Okay, if that's the case, so then let's then put this to the test. Put this final thing to the test. That you are saying that worship God. Now, is God really going to protect you? Is God really going to do this for you? And Satan then quotes, look, it has been stated that God's going to do all these things for you. Don't you trust that God's going to do that? And Jesus says, yes, I have to have trust, but I don't need to push my trust. I don't have to test it. I recognize I have seen in other forms, in other fashions, how God has this relationship with us. This is why the Old Testament reading is also so important. Recognizing back that God has been doing this for literally generations, setting aside and providing for God's people. And this is why that is so important, so that Jesus can be able to state this so confidently. When we are looking at how we are utilizing food in the developed world, I'll say, sugar is a quick hit. It's an easy hit. It feels good. It tastes good, but it doesn't sustain. It doesn't give us that long-term thing that we're looking for. And we know that when we're eating foods that are having more nutrient-dense foods, less processed because it's real food. It grew in the ground. It was an animal. We eat that stuff. We recognize how it helps us sustain. We don't need to eat technically as much. We're not as hungry because we are giving ourselves stuff that actually sustains. We're not looking for the quick hit. We're looking for something that lasts long, that holds us through. And I think this is, again, God can react quickly, like we talked about with the question last week. But we also have to recognize that we have a God who plays the long game and plays it extremely well. So when Satan is seeing that we can have these quick things and God can do all this quick stuff, why wouldn't you want all of that stuff happening super, super quickly? We have to recognize that the typical nature of God is long, and that God is looking for something that is going to destroy Satan over the long haul, not just right now. And that's sometimes really difficult for us to get our heads around. But that also means it's breaking down some of these different barriers that we as people have put in here. Looking at how there is no distinction between Jew and Greek, coming from the Romans text in verse 12. This idea on how we can put up these arbitrary guidelines, these arbitrary things, saying that this is going to be something that differentiates, or even coming from the Deuteronomy text, coming from verse 11, the same type of thing. We have to recognize when we are sometimes trying to get around, well, it's the calories within sugar. So thus, I'm going to use different things like stevia or some of these other alternatives, and then that's a low calorie or no calorie sweetener. We recognize that, again, it's not necessarily that these are be all end all bad, but it's also recognizing that this isn't going to sustain the way that we are looking for the sustaining. We're looking for something that's going to last long. Flowing from a land flowing with milk and honey. The honey is going to have, yes, it is a sugar, it is a carbohydrate, but there is a little bit more there to it. And if you have like true harvest honey, you will taste the difference. Not just the clover honey. There's different flowers that are in bloom, so thus there's different taste to it. There is more there to it. There's more complexity to it. And that can be added to other dishes to give it more there. We are looking for a sustainable faith. We are looking for something that is going to last. We are in the season of Lent. This is not going to be quick and easy. This is going to need to be something that is going to sustain us through these 40 days minus Sundays. We're going to need something that is going to hold us for an extended period of time. We do not need these quick hits. We need something that's going to help us hold for the long haul. If you think about a lot of these different animals who go through torpor or go through some type of migration, are they going after quick and easy sugars? Somewhat. But they're also going for things that is going to sustain them, especially if they're going to be going that far. They're more interested in something that's going to have the nutrients to be able to push them and continue to get them to where they need to go than just having something that's going to get them through the next day. There is a lot of calculations that they're going for and what they are searching out to try to eat to sustain them for that period of time. Our faith, and technically we could even argue our own diet, should be the same way. Are we looking for something that's just going to sustain us for this moment, or are we looking for something that's going to try to sustain us for an extended period of time so we don't have to eat right away again? Are we looking for that food or that water that is going to fully quench us and that we won't have to drink again like we've heard in the scriptures before? Or are we going to just keep going for these quick, easy hits and that we're going to be hungry again constantly because this is what's easy for us to acquire? So the question I have for you this week is, where do you need to find something that's more sustaining than these quick hits? Where in your life do you need to find something that's more sustaining rather than a quick hit of something? I know one of the things that we have with even in the United States culture is, the 2:30 or 3 o'clock feeling where you're getting toward the end of the day and I'm needing that pick me up. I'm needing something. What is that? Is it because we're tired? And we've talked about sleep and how important sleep is. Is it that we are thirsty? Maybe it's just water. Do we need to have something that has a little bit of fiber to it that's going to sustain? Or are we going for that quick, easy snack, that quick hit because that's what's going to get me through? Or even reversing it the other way. Are we constantly caffeinating ourselves because we're so sleep deprived that we just need something to actually get us going when our body is saying, I'm so tired, help me? As we are in this Lenten season and as we are going through a long season, we need to make sure that we're thinking in that same reference. We're acknowledging that our life needs to be on a long scale, that we're working on a long scale, not a short scale. And that in doing that and going through that habit, thinking through the whole thing, it's the reason why scientists keep studying things, keep reevaluating things, looking at things differently. It forces us to then keep considering and keep questioning in a healthy way to help us grow. Our faith shouldn't be just something that's sitting on the shelf. Our faith should be something that's constantly growing. It's really easy for us to just go through and learn, Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so, and stop there. And if we stop there, we miss so much of the relationship. And we can see in these texts this week, God wants so much more than just you being able to say that. Jesus wants to then, okay, because of that, let's talk about what this means. Let's work through and how does that work in our day-to-day lives? Let's figure out how then we're going to live this out that's going to affect not only you, but others around you dramatically. How are we going to get you through those times where it is really difficult and it's really hard to say that? All of these things are vitally important, and I think it's something for all of us to be considering and thinking about, especially in this Lenten season. Contemplating and thinking about how are we continuing to grow deeper? How are we continuing to do things in a way that works long, that's setting us up for the next month, the next year, the next decade, the next generation? I think that's the frame of mind that we need to be in more often than not. And if we miss that boat, I think then we lose sight of what we are actually trying to accomplish. And I think without it, we are also missing the true character of who God is. So, we'll wrap this up as we always do. I pray God blesses you through your faith and amazes you through science.